In this video, you are going to learn everything that you need to know about testing your React applications using Playwright. Playwright is an end-to-end testing tool that literally allows you to test your applications exactly as a real user would. And it does that by spinning up a browser, running your application, and going and clicking on things, typing on inputs, and making sure that your application behaves in its entirety. That means front-end, back-end, and database included, exactly as you expect, and that there's no unwanted surprises. So get ready, get excited, because you're going to learn a lot in this video. And by the way, if you want to learn how to build a big and complex application with React as a total beginner with no prior experience needed, check out Project React in the description. Trust me, you will not regret it. Let's get into it. Alright, so over here, I have a very simple application that's running locally, and now we're going to want to test this application using Playwright. This is obviously a very simple application. We have the homepage over here. We have this h1 tag that says homepage. We have this form over here, which is a link. If I hover it, my cursor turns into a pointer, and I can click this, and it's going to redirect me to the actual form URL over here, /form, where we get to see the form, and we have an input field over here where I can type something, for example, test, and I can press add, and we're going to add that item directly in here, and the input is going to be cleared. Again, this is a very simple application, and we're now going to look at Playwright and how to write tests, integration tests for this application. So to do that, we're going to go here to the actual documentation of Playwright. That is going to be at playwright.dev. And in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we could test this very simple application. But more importantly, I'm also going to walk you through my thought process of what to test. Because unfortunately, a lot of tutorials don't actually show this to you. They show you how to use the actual tool, in this case Playwright. They show you how to write the test and all of that. But they never teach you the core principles of testing and why you should test something in the first place. And more specifically, what to test versus what not to test. So as you can see here, Playwright enables reliable end-to-end testing for modern web applications. If you don't know what end-to-end testing is, as opposed to unit testing, end-to-end testing means that you're taking the entire application and you're actually running it with the whole front end, with the whole back end and a database, and you're testing it as a real user would. So you're running the entire application, you're going and clicking on things, typing on inputs, and seeing how the application behaves, as opposed to a unit test where you're testing a component or something in isolation. This, you're testing everything, the entire application as a whole. So let's get started, and let's come here and click on the Get Started button. This is going to take us to the installation page of Playwright, and we're going to follow these instructions over here, which honestly are pretty simple. We're going to start by installing Playwright, and we're going to do it by installing it in an existing application, which probably is also going to be your case. In my case, I'm using pnpm, so I'm going to come here and take this command, pnpm create Playwright, and I'm going to come here to my VSCode. This is the actual code that's running the application, and I'm going to run it here inside of the terminal. This is now going to ask me where I want to put my end-to-end test. I want to leave this in the default test folder. It's going to ask me if I want to set up GitHub Actions workflow. I won't, because this is a simple application. We don't have anything on GitHub. Then we're going to want to install the Playwright browsers. We're going to leave this to default. Playwright essentially runs this test on multiple browsers to make sure that your application runs the same on different browsers, which is a really cool thing. And after that, we run that command. We have this nice little log here telling us that Playwright is successfully initialized in our project. And as we can see, if we open up here the Explorer page on the right, we have two new folders. We have the test folder over here, and we have the test examples folder. Now, the test folder, if I open up example.spec.ts and actually close this terminal, this is just a simple example test file that Playwright automatically puts to get yourself started. This is cool. We're going to be working within this file to actually add the specific test of our own application. But then we also have test examples, and this has a different file over here that is really, really useful. As you can see, this file is very big. It's much bigger than the first file, and this actually has all of the tests for a demo application that Playwright built and hosted themselves. You can find it here, https demo.playwright. Let me just come here and open this in the browser. If we open a new tab over here, we have this application, and this is a simple to-do application created by Playwright themselves. So we can add here a new to-do. We can do test, for example, press enter. It's going to add it. We can complete it. We can also delete them, and we have a fully working application. And in this file, we have all of the tests for that application to make sure that it works correctly. And this is really useful because if you're just starting out with Playwright and you don't really know how to actually use it, you can use this file and you can refer to it and see how they actually recommend that you do all of these tests, right? You have a bunch of code over here for testing different things that most likely is going to cover some tests that you're trying to do for your own application. So this is a really, really useful file, and I would highly recommend that you spend some time looking through this because there's a ton of things to learn over here that you can apply directly to your own tests. Now, in our case, we're not going to use it. We're just going to be working in this simple file over here, and we're going to create our own tests directly. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to take all of this and delete this because we want to start fresh, and I'm still going to leave these imports over here because we are going to use them. So now first, let's think about our application and what we actually want to test in our application. So here, let me just run the application again, pnpm dev, just to have it running. And let's go back now to the actual home page and let's think, what do we want to test? Because our application is really simple. We don't need to have any fancy tests. So when we first start and load the application, this is the screen that we're seeing. This is the home screen. Now this home screen only has a few elements, so there's not really that much to test, but still we should test that what we're seeing on this screen is exactly what we expect. For example, we should test that we have a heading on this page that says homepage, right? Because we're putting this here, we want to make sure that it actually is there and that it has the correct text. We also have this link over here that says form. We want to test that first of all the link is there and that when we click the link, we are successfully redirected to /form. And here I have an error. Why do I have an error? There we go. It's fixed. That was successfully redirected to the actual form. That's all that we want to test for this specific page. And also maybe that the title over here is cause and solutions, just for good measure that the title is also what we expect. Then we also have the form page, which has a little bit more functionality. And here as well, we want to write our own test suites to test this specific page. We're going to first test the same thing, that the form is actually there, and also that the input and the add button is there, and that I can type something on the input, and that when I type on the input, that whatever I typed actually ends up over here in a list, and that the input is then cleared, right? We're testing the actual functionality of our actual application. And note here that this doesn't depend really on any individual piece. It doesn't depend on just the front end, on just the back end, or just the database, but rather it depends on all of the pieces working together. Because let's say that I did have a whole back end that would actually save everything that I type in here, we would also be testing that. We would be testing that whatever we type in here, when we add it, it goes to the back end, it gives us a correct response, and we see it here on the screen. This is what we call an integration test. Now, of course, in this simple example, we actually don't have a backend. Everything is handled on the front end, but you can imagine that if we had a backend, we would be indirectly testing that through this integration test, because the only way that this item would show up here is if the backend is also working. If the backend is down and it doesn't work, or if there's an error in the backend, this test item over here would not show up. So doing these tests actually test everything from front end to backend in a whole integration test. And that's generally how you want to approach thinking about testing and what to test. You take any screen that you have and you look at what the user can do, what any user can do in your application, what they expect, what they can see on the screen, and you just test those cases, those paths, and make sure that they're correct. And also, if they're not correct, if there's an error, you make sure that your application responds in a way that you expect whenever there's any given error. So in our case, that's the form, the functionality of the form, and what we see here, and that's it. We don't need to test anything else. And in the home page, we have no interactivity. We just have a bunch of elements, so we just need to test that the elements are actually there. So let's go back to our VS Code and actually start writing some tests. So first of all, I'm going to do all of this work in this one example.spec.ts file, just to keep things simple. In a real application, you might want to split this up into multiple files, each related to different types of tests. That's totally recommended, but we're going to do this in one file just to keep things very simple. And the second thing is we're going to have two different groups of tests because we have two different pages. We have the home page and we have the form page, and it's generally a better idea to group those things together because related tests usually have some common functionality that should go in the same group. So let's go back to VS Code and actually start writing some tests. Now, the way that we're going to do this is, first of all, I'm going to write everything in this one file, example.spec.ts, just to keep things simple for the video. But ideally, in a real project, you might want to have separate files, each for a different group of related tests. The second thing is, even though I'm putting all of this in one file, I will separate my tests into two groups. I'm going to have one group for the home page and one group for the form page, just to keep things a little bit more organized, so that I put all of the tests related to the home page in one block and all of the tests related to the form page in another block. Now in Playwright, you can actually do that. You can create groups, and you do that by using a describe block. So let's come here and let's do test.describe. And here we can actually give it a name. So for example, we can do home page like this. This is going to be all of the tests that are related to the home page. We're going to put them inside of this describe block. Then we give this a function over here, an arrow function, and inside of here, we're going to put all of our tests that are related to the home page. The only thing that this describe block actually does is when you have an actual UI and when you see the actual test being run, they're going to be grouped under this category to make it easier for yourself to organize. I always like to do this and again, group related tests together in a describe block because it just makes more sense. And then in here, we can actually write our tests. So the first test that we want to do is if I go back here to the actual application is we want to first open up this page over here. So localhost 3000, because we do have to navigate manually to it. And then we're going to check that the title is correct. We're going to check that we have a heading that says homepage, and we're going to check that we have a form link over here that says form. That's the only thing that we're going to test in this one first test in this describe block. So we're going to start by writing a test. So we can do test like this, give it a parenthesis. Then we need to give it a title, and we're going to do should have correct metadata and elements, right? You always want to give this a descriptive test, a descriptive title to actually represent what the test is actually doing, right? So should have the correct metadata and elements. This is very clear as to what this test does. Then as the second argument, we're going to give this an asynchronous function. So we're going to do async like this. And this is going to have one argument, and it's going to be an object. And from that object, we're actually going to get the page property like so, because we're going to be using this page inside of our test, right? So in this block over here, we created a test. We gave it a title, should have correct metadata and elements. Then as the second function is the actual function that we're going to use to test. And this page over here, we're going to actually use to access different things on that specific page, like access the title, access any elements, and check that they're exactly what we expect. Now to check the title, this is what we're going to do. And by the way, to really see how to do any of these things, remember that you have this demo-to-dos app spec over here. You can actually look at this and you can find how they get the actual title of a screen, how they get any single element, or you can look at the actual documentation. I'm only showing you here the simple version of doing things, but if you want to go a bit deeper and learn a little bit more, you have all of the resources available to be able to do that. So we're going to write await and then expect. So we are going to be expecting something, and this is coming directly from Playwright add test. This is this import over here. And then we're going to do page. So we're going to expect that the page dot, and then here's a helper function to have title, and we're going to give it here the title that we expect, which is going to be Cosden solutions like this. So now we have an actual test and we have some code inside of it that is going to await, and then it's going to expect the page to have a title of Cosden solutions. This is a very simple test. So as long as we actually open up this page over here and that we have a title Cosden solutions, this test is going to work. But before we can actually test that, there's one more thing that we have to do beforehand that I left out on purpose just to make it really obvious how important this is. You cannot actually expect the page to have anything before even visiting the page in the first place, right? In this test, there's nothing that we're telling this test to actually go to any specific page. We're just getting the page over here and we're expecting it to have a specific title. But what page? It doesn't know what URL to open. In this case, we actually have to give it right before we test something. We have to navigate to that specific page. And we do that by doing await and then page.goto, and this is a function, and here we give it a URL. So for example, http://localhost and then 3000 like so, which is the actual endpoint that our application is running in. You have to give this to each test because each test first of all runs in isolation, and each test needs to be able to know what page to actually go to. So first we go to that specific page that is going to wait until the page is actually loaded, and then it's going to proceed to this line over here, which is going to check the title of that page and make sure that the title is exactly Cosden solutions, which is what we expect. And with that, we have everything that we need to actually run this test and see if it passes. So the way that you run tests in Playwright is you open up the terminal over here. I'm going to create here a new terminal because we have to have our application running. You can configure this to automatically run the application. It's in the documentation. In our case, we're just going to keep things simple. We're just going to write npx playwright test, and then I'm just going to put this command over here. This is going to run 3 tests using 3 different workers because it runs the test on different browsers. That's why we have different tests, and all of these tests are run in parallel, so they're all running at the same time. But as you can see here, we ran 3 tests and 3 tests actually have passed, and we can even have a report over here if we wanted to. We can just do this, run this command. This is going to actually show us here a report, which we can see. And we can see that we have all of these tests over here actually running. Let me just copy this and then close it and go to Chrome because I like to film everything in Chrome. There we go. this is the actual report. So homepage should have correct metadata and elements. It ran on Chromium, it passed. On Firefox, it passed. On WebKit, it passed. All of these different tests pass, and we're making sure that our application at least has the correct title over here, which it does. This passes. Great. Something else that we could do is we can run a different command. We can run the test command over here with -- and then UI. This is actually going to spin up a real browser, and it's going to be over here. Let's open up this browser over here. Let me just make it the correct size for you. Let me maybe zoom in a little bit. And here we actually have a UI to actually run our tests in. There's this green button over here which we can press, and that is going to run all of our tests and all of our files. And you see here we have the home page. This is, by the way, the describe block. This home page over here, that's why we're selecting it. That's why it's a different group, because of the describe block. And inside of here we should have correct metadata and elements, and we have the actual test over here. Page go to, and then expect title to have, and it did, and it passed, and we are good to go. Our test actually passed. This is a different way to actually run your test if you want to visually see how your actual tests are being run. Great. So now with this, we can actually continue and fill up the rest of the missing pieces of our test. Because remember, we don't only want to test that this has a correct title, we also want to test that over here we have the actual heading that says homepage, and that we have a form that is a link that we can actually click to and go to the form page. So let's write those tests. So over here, we're going to test first that we have a heading that is of type heading and has homepage in it. So we're going to do await and then expect page.get by role, and this is going to get an element by its role, which we can actually give it a role heading like this, and we can actually give it some properties over here. For example, the name, and we're going to give this here home page like so. So what this is going to do is it's going to await, and then it's going to expect, and then page.get by role. This is going to get any element within the page that has a role of heading that also has name homepage, which is actually going to be the text inside of that heading. If we have this, then we can actually validate that we actually do have this over here, and that it also has the correct text. Because if this did not have homepage, we would not get this element over here, right? So the only thing that we need to do after that is we need to call to be visible, because we need to check that this element is actually visible on the screen. So this test is only going to pass if we have a heading visible on the screen that is of type heading and that also has homepage as the text, right? In any other case, it's not going to pass, but if it has this, it is going to pass. So let's come back here to our actual UI and let's press play again and see if our test still passes after these changes. And it does. You can see here, expect to be visible, and it's even highlighting the homepage over here. It's getting the actual heading element and it's checking that it has the correct name inside of it. And just to be sure that our tests are actually indeed working, I like to do this sometimes just to really make sure, because sometimes you never know. Let's come here and let's actually add an extra E to make this an invalid name. And now let's see if our test should fail, because right now we don't have a heading that has homepage with 2 E's. So this test should actually fail. So if you play this test over here, we're going to see that it takes a little longer, because when it fails, it actually retries the test. And in a short while, it is going to fail. And it's going to see here that expect to be visible has failed because we have no actual heading with homepage and 2 E's. So now we've confirmed that our test is actually behaving as we expect and that we can rely on it to actually fail when it should. Great. So now with this, we can come back, we can fix this over here. Let's remove the extra E and let's just test that our link is also visible, because remember, we do have a link over here and we also want to check that this is visible and that it has the correct text. So we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to do await, expect, and then page.get by role, and we're going to give it here link this time, and we're also going to give it name, and it's going to be form like so, and we're going to await and expect to be visible, and we're going to wait for this and expect it to be visible. Let's come back here to our test. Let's rerun this and we should see all green passing test. There we go. Our link is also visible. There we go. We have successfully completed our first actual test, testing that we should have the correct metadata and elements on that specific screen. Great. Now, the next thing that we want to test is that when we click on this link over here, this form link, we are redirected to the form page, because while it's cool that we did test that this link is over here and that it says form, we did not actually test that when we click this form, it brings us to the expected page. And this is also important to test, because a user is going to be able to click on this, and if they're not redirected to the form, then you have a bug in your application, and having a test for that is going to prevent that bug. So we're going to come here, and for that, we're actually going to make a new test, because now this is a different test. We're no longer testing that we have the correct metadata and elements. We're actually testing that when we click the link, it redirects us to exactly where we expect. So we're going to have to make a new test. So we're going to come here and do test, and here we're going to give this as a name, should redirect to form page on click, like this, click, and we're going to give this a sync as well, a function. And here we're going to give the page, and we're going to do the exact same thing as we did before and write our test. Now, the thing is, we're also going to have to write the same code over here to actually navigate to that specific page, because every single test in Playwright runs in isolation and you have a whole new session every single time, which means you have to reopen the browser and re-go to the same page that you were before. So we have to write this again for every single test that we want to go to this page. But doing it this way is not the recommended way, because you are repeating yourself, right? You're going to have to write this on every single test that you want to navigate to that same page. And the truth is, on the home page in this describe block, most of our tests, if not all of them, are going to need to go to the same page. So it would be better if you had a way to run something before every single test where we can put this little piece of code to make our life a little bit easier and not have to repeat ourselves. And the cool thing about Playwright is that there actually is. We can inject a hook before every single test, and we can put this piece of code inside of that hook. And the way that we do that is we come here, we make a little bit of space, and inside of this describe block, because we only want this hook to apply to any test inside of this block, that's also another use case for having describe blocks, we're going to create a before each hook. So we're going to do test.before each, and we're going to give this here a function. So this is going to be async like this, and it's going to take the same page as we had before. And here we're just going to put an arrow function, and we're going to take this code over here and we're going to paste it inside of this hook over here. So now we don't need to have it inside of this individual test, and we also don't need to have it inside of this test over here. And just to prove this to you, I'm going to comment out this test, and I'm just going to run the test over here and run the same test, and you're going to see that it still passes because we have this in the hook, and this runs before each individual test. So let's come back here, let's press play, and we're going to see that this is still going to work because our code is exactly the same. We've now just put this in its own before each hook, which means that if we have a second test or any other number of tests, we don't have to repeat ourselves every single time. And finally, let's finish up and write our test to actually check the redirect on a specific link. So we're going to do await, and then let's see, await, and then this is going to be page get by role. We're going to give this link again. We're going to give this name form, and then instead of to be visible, we're going to call a different function. We're going to call click like this, which is actually going to click on that specific input. So then we're going to have this click, and we're going to await and expect to be on a different page, on the form page. So we're going to await, expect page to have title, and we're going to do here form like this, because whenever we go to the actual form page, you're going to see that the page title actually changes to form. So we're just going to check that. We could also check the URL. We could check this in a different way if we wanted to. We're going to keep things simple and just check if we have the actual form over here. That's going to be enough. So let's come back here to our actual runner, and let's run all of these tests. And now we're going to run 2 tests, and we're going to see that both of them pass. So the first one still passes. That's great. And the second one also passes. We're going to click, and we're actually going to see it found that actual element, the form element to click. You have this red little circle over here, and it clicked it, and then it checked the actual page, and you see here we're on form, and the title is form, and this test also passed. Great. And with this, our tests are passing, and we can guarantee and make sure that our application is going to work exactly as we expect now. And even more importantly, if we ever make a change to any code in the application in the future, having these tests over here is going to make sure that if we made some code that actually breaks something, one of these tests is going to break, and we're going to know about it, and we're going to be able to fix it. That's why you want to have tests in your application, to make sure that your application works as expected now and also in the future if you make any changes to it. And having this in a visual runner where you can actually inspect every single test and go to them and actually see the UI that was rendered at each specific step and see what the test runner is trying to click through is really, really useful. And it's also very useful for debugging, right? Whenever you're actually developing your tests and putting them, I would recommend that you use this UI because it is really useful. So now with this, the only thing that we have to do is actually write the tests for our form page over here. So all of these tests over here. And for this, I'm going to skip a little bit and just be faster because I don't want to drag this video on by just repeating the same things. But I'm going to show you what this actually looks like for the form page. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a new describe block, because now it's no longer going to be on the home page. It's going to be on the form page. So we're going to come here and do test.describe. And here we're going to do form page like so. We're going to give this a function again, and we're going to put some code in here. We're also going to take the same describe block over here because we're going to want to do the same exact principle in here, but instead of going to localhost 3000, we're going to put localhost 3000 and then form, so that every single test inside of this describe block automatically starts on the form page, which is what we want. And then we're going to come here and write our first test, which is going to be literally the same test as we had before. So we can even copy this directly. We can come here, we can paste this. It should also have the correct correct metadata in elements, but just for the form page. So in this case, the title is going to be form. So we're going to put here form like this. The heading is going to have also form like this. It's not going to have home page. So we're going to save this, and then we're going to get, instead of a link, because we actually don't have a link in here, I'm going to get by placeholder. And over here, if I open up the form component, we have here this input, and we have a placeholder that says enter item. We can get this input using its placeholder, and because this is the only one that has this placeholder, this is safe to use to actually check that it is there, that we have an input with this specific placeholder. So we're going to do get by placeholder. This only takes one argument, so we're just going to remove the second argument, and we're going to put enter item over here. And we're going to expect that to also be visible. And finally, because we also have a button over here that has add, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do await expect page.get by role, and then that's going to be button. And we're going to give it here name, and that's going to be add, and then to be visible like so. And now we have the same test that is testing that every single element on the screen is also visible. If you run this, we have now our new describe block over here. So you see it's in a different section. That's one of the benefits of using describe blocks. And we have this test that also passes. All of these elements are visible, and they're exactly what we expect. Great. Now there's two more tests that I want to run. And the first one is going to be that initially, whenever we load this page and refresh into it, we should have no items displayed over here, right? That's our initial empty state. So that's going to be one test. The second test is going to be once we actually enter an item, we're going to check that we actually have that item over here and that this input is clear. Because remember, if I put test, we're going to add the item, it's going to be here, and then this input is going to be clear. That is our second test. Now, to be able to do this, we're going to have to come in here to our form component, and we're going to have to add a few properties to some elements to be able to reference them in our test and make some expectations, assertions on those specific elements. And we're going to be making use of the data test ID attribute. So the data test ID attribute is an attribute that you can place on any single element. It is just like any normal prop over here, and you can give it a specific test ID, and then you can use that test ID to reference that element inside of your test and do any single thing to it. So for example, we're going to want to write our empty test, right? So we're going to come here and we're going to do test, and that is going to be should have empty items list on start, right? So we're going to give this an asynchronous function that is going to take the page over here. And this is going to be our test that makes sure and check that whenever we're actually loading this page initially, we have an empty items list, and this should be empty like this. And for that, we're going to want to get this actual element by its test ID, which we have to add over here. So we're going to want to add it on this unordered list tag over here, because we're going to want to get this element and make sure that its contents inside this map over here is empty and that there's nothing. So we're going to come here and we're going to do data test ID, and we're going to give this items list like so. Now we're going to be able to come in our test and use that test ID to get this element and make sure and check that it's empty inside. So we're going to do const items list equals page get by test ID, as you can see here. And now we're going to give this items list, which is the test ID that we gave it in initially in our code over here. And then the only thing that we have to do is we have to await expect items list dot to be empty like so. We're going to call the to be empty on the items list. We could have also done things like this. We could have put things over here, right? Inside of this directly, this would have worked. I just showed you the different way because we are working in JavaScript and TypeScript, and we can create variables if you wanted to. And sometimes it is useful if you want to reuse this item list in other places in this test. You want to create a separate variable for it so that you can then just reuse it. So now if you go back here to our actual application, we should run this test and it should work. It's going to get that element by its test ID. And there we go. It got the actual element and it saw that it was empty, which is what our test expects. So it passed our test. There we go. And finally, the last test that we want to do is we want to check that whenever we enter an item and we put something in here, the item is actually added over there and that we have an empty input box over here. Now to do that, we're going to have to come in here to our form again, and we're going to have to add an item over here to li to again get it, access it in our test, and make some inspection, some assertion checks to it. So we're going to do this. I'm going to do data test ID, and I'm just going to give this item like this to keep things very simple. Then we're going to come back here to our test. We're going to create a new test that is going to say should add item to list. That is going to be again a function, async. We're going to give this page like this, and then we're going to come here and we're going to do, so we're going to do const input equals page.get by placeholder. We're going to give this enter item like so, and then we're going to call a function on this input. We're going to do await input.fill, and this is going to be a function that, as you can see over here, will set a value on the input field. This is what you use whenever you want to put text on a specific input field. So we're going to do item 1 like so. So now this input is going to have item 1 as its value. Then we're going to come here and we're going to await page.getByRole. We're going to get this button. We're going to access our button and actually click it. So we're going to come here and do name. And what happened? Let's come here and do name, add, and then we're going to do click like so. And now this is going to click the actual button and it's going to trigger the actual functionality that we have on that button with that specific value in the input field. So then after we click the button, we should have our new item on the screen. So we have to get it and make sure that it has item 1, which is what we put over here as our text. So we're going to do const item equals page.getByTestID, and now we're going to give this item, which again, remember, this is the test ID, data test ID, we gave it item, and we're also going to do nth, and then we're going to put 0, because over here, this is going to be a list, so we're mapping over every single item. Each item is going to have the same test ID, and we can use the nth one, so the nth item, and access the first item in that list. So, right, so that's going to be our item over here. And now that we have our item, all we have to do is just await, expect item, to have text and then item 1 like so, and then we're also going to await and then expect input to be empty like so, because remember, every single time that we type something, that we click this button, our input should go back to being empty so that we can type something else. So this is making that check, and then we're checking that the item has indeed the item 1 text. And now with this, if I come back over here, go back to our test runner and replay all of the tests, we should see that every single test in our application passes, and we have our should add item to the list test passing. We have over here, we're filling the text. You can see here we have item put over here, then we're clicking the button, then we have an item, we're getting it, and we're checking that it has item 1, and then we're also checking that the input is actually empty. There you go. You are testing the entire application and every single thing that the user can do, and you're making sure that your application is behaving exactly as you expect, end-to-end, front-end, back-end database involved, and that there are no unwanted surprises. This is great. Now, again, remember, this was very simple, right? You can obviously do a lot more than this. I would highly, highly recommend that you come here and you look at this demo app over here and actually run the application, run all of these tests, and really look at how they're doing things. They're doing a lot more things that I did in this tutorial video, and they have a bunch of helper functions over here that they're using across multiple text. They're using JSON, they're doing all of those things, and this is a really great resource to actually check and make sure that you're writing your test properly and that you're following all of the best practices. I would highly, highly recommend this. And also, I would also highly recommend that you look and read the documentation of Playwright, because they have a lot of examples, they have a lot of APIs and documentations that you can use to actually write your test. Doing all of these things, you've now learned how to actually use Playwright to write your test, and more importantly, you've learned how to understand what to test and what not to test, and you've seen a real world example of how I would approach thinking about this and writing the actual test for a very simple application. And now you're good to go to apply this to your own React applications and write some really cool tests and have some really robust applications that have not one single bug in production. Let's go. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos just like this one, make sure to leave this video a big thumbs up. You can also click here to subscribe, or you can click here to watch a different video of mine that YouTube seems to think that you're really going to enjoy. And with that being said, my name has been Darius Kozlan. This is Kozlan Solutions. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.